Hello and welcome to Collectively Speaking. This is a new podcast series looking at the big issues in the built environment. Welcome to the second in the series. And today I'm going to be talking to somebody I've known for a very long time. In fact, I think almost 40 years. Gary Young was a very young architect when he first joined Farrell's, and since then he has been working on incredible projects in the UK and overseas, continuing his role working with Farrell's but also through his own practice, Place 54 Architects. And he's been an incredibly important part of the LDN Collective right from the outset. The thing about Gary is he really is somebody you can describe as a master planner. And I say that because he's one of the rare people that has been able to turn his thinking and his approach to architecture and the built environment to much larger scale regeneration projects. At the moment, Gary and his longtime collaborator Hannah Smart and myself are part of master planning teams for some really exciting projects. These include master plans for new garden communities in South Oxfordshire and also in Huntingdonshire, as well as a garden village project in Solihull. Gary is somebody I would describe as a polymath. He's very good at synthesizing different specialist inputs, which is absolutely essential when you're developing a credible and coherent vision for a place that might house 15,000 people in the future. He will explain better than I can how we go about this in terms of what is a sustainable community, but really it's about looking at it from every angle, whether that's employment, transport, housing, right the way through to education, culture, leisure. All of these things need to be considered when you are taking forward a master plan on this scale. Throughout his career, he's worked on some really groundbreaking projects, and I think the interesting thing is how much we learn each time we go through one of these large-scale, long-term regeneration projects. His first experience of this was at Cambourne in South Cambridgeshire, which was very much before my time, but there were a lot of lessons learnt there. It was a pioneer in terms of landscape-led master planning, but I think that the next major project he was involved in, which was at northwest Bicester, which was one of the government's flagship eco-towns, in fact now the only one to be building out. We really took the principles of environmental sustainability and started to apply them to social sustainability. And that's absolutely critical, to think holistically, and that's something that we've now taken forward into the projects we're working on through the LDN Collective. Northwest Bicester was also the first true zero carbon development project. And I think that for that reason alone, it's a fantastic case study that we've all learnt from immensely. Hi, Gary. So I'm just going to start off by asking about the interesting transition that you made. I think in the early days at Farrell's, you were involved in some of the iconic building projects like TVAM and the MI6 building. But you then sort of moved into larger scale urban planning and urban design and projects like Brindley Place in Birmingham, and also after that projects like Northwest Bicester and more recently Otterpool, as well as the really interesting projects you're working on for the LDN Collective. Can you tell me a bit about how you made that transition? Because from my experience, master planning is not just big architecture. It's a completely different mindset, a completely different approach. So what is it that you think helped you to make that transition?
It's really through my own interest in environmental design that I've sustained the interest in master planning, because it's not just basically laying out land and shifting boxes around. It actually has a real outcome which can benefit people, the occupier, investors who are now realizing that having a corporate social responsibility towards a green agenda is crucial, and ultimately people who want to live and enjoy the one planet that we have a huge responsibility, which I've always taken incredibly seriously in bringing an environmental agenda to every project. And that in itself has driven my career. It's why I'm still interested in challenges. I represent a group here in the collective, which is also inspiring. And I've said it many times, is that one of my reasons for shifting away from somewhat working as large consultancies to small is the benefit of working with the collective, with people I like, people of like mind, and collaborating with those expertise, which is an essential part now of the agenda of environmentalism, because there are many, many facts that we now understand enough to be able to implement into plans. It was once a guessing game, and now it's absolutely true knowledge that can be brought to bear. It's also subject to a lot of variations of policy, investment decisions, but the facts are the facts now. We know it's an emergency. We know there's a rise in climate temperatures. We know there are ways to fix that. We just need to do our all-round best to make that happen. And hence, I'm still in the industry working on these projects with that aim.
So I suppose it would be really interesting to hear from you, having worked on different projects, all of which, because they are large scale and long term, take time to come to fruition. But how are you taking that thinking into master planning these future communities, and how much has changed? So, for example, I know you work closely with organisations like Bioregional on environmental sustainability, and more recently organisations around who specialise in home working and post-COVID ways of living, and how that is affecting design of new places. Well,
that's a fascinating story. The first true new settlement that I designed with Farrell's was Cambourne in Cambridgeshire. These settlements we're talking about range in size from 2,000 homes to 10,000 homes. And variously they've been categorized as eco-towns and then garden towns. Ultimately, they're places where you are starting with an environment which has existing uses, quite normally farmland, and you then build together with a group of consultants a proposal for a new settlement. Now, the lessons learned is so important, and Max has mentioned Cambourne. This was designed in the early 90s and is complete, and I have attended several good sessions organised by the University of Cambridge as lessons learned, bringing in all the agencies, bringing in the people who represent local communities, the teaching, the religious and community representatives, all to give feedback. And I think, without going through each one in turn, I think the most important thing is where we are now, we have this resource of two types. One is the data from previous master plans is fed back into what works and what doesn't work. And this is so important, and it influences the way that you plan travel, and it influences the way that you predict use of green space. But we also have a resource in the people who now live in these, who have actually naturally got complaints about the way it was done once, and you can take those on board about the time it takes to bring important facilities forward and analysing which ones work best. So, for example, it was mentioned Bioregional, a part of the Eco Bicester, and their role as a true sustainability not-for-profit organisation has been to really, put a level table down and say what works and what delivers within their corporate social goals and advise the client. And interestingly enough, one of the first things that the client provided was a room in one of their first houses, which was a community room, not designated to any function, but just for the community. And a meeting room as such, it is one of the things that I learned from Cambourne was what the community leaders were pleading for. So, for example, a pub is a pub. Not everyone wants to go to a pub. A school is a school. Not everyone has children. A sports gym is a sports gym. Not everybody wants to go to a gym. A meeting room that you can just organise for any event doesn't need to be bigger than this room. And it's a piece of glue that holds the community together. So it's finding these things out from previous experience and getting an investor to offer something that does provide that cohesion and creating a community. So the place strengthens from very simple starting point.
Well, Gary, that's really interesting. I'd like to sort of follow up on that a bit by just asking you about the why. Things are changing. People are much more interested and feeling more obliged to engage with the community early on. But why is it that you think that hasn't happened in the past? And why is it that people are still resistant to that?
Yes, I do. And I think I would hope they continue and go further. So a couple of points on this is that when you're planning something as large as a new settlement, a new town, it's always going to impact someone because it's change. So there's going to be a perception that's negative from some people, and others are positive because they're looking for a home or they're wanting to relocate in an area where there's insufficient communication infrastructure and so on. So, if a new town comes with the best broadband, then, you've got a series of people who are running to join it, for example. But the key to it all, which is why it's slow and the engagement process is not necessarily widespread, is that here we are talking together, two professionals. I mean, really, we should be out talking to the potential new occupiers. And when these engagement events are organised, quite often most people are in the defensive. And the key is you have to listen. And you're never going to satisfy everybody, but the ones that you can hear giving you positive feedback, and even the negative feedback, you listen to. And it's basically recalibrating your mind, not to want to talk to like-minded professionals, but to engage. And then you get very good people who can become an agency for that. Bioregion are very good because they offer themes. So it's almost like saying, well, if you did nothing, what would happen? We know there's a climate emergency. Just sort of corralling yourself in your own house isn't the answer, because there is a way to demonstrate that good results can come out of collaboration, creating a community where food share is at the heart of the organisation. There's green car, there's car club, there's electric charging, there's a bus service. Oh, you mean you can have a bus service to get to the station, and will it be free? Well, it will be electric bus and so on and so on. So it will have less carbon emission. And all these things you can begin to offer, the client would not actually reject. I think the problem obviously comes from the fact that investors are scared of actually being told that they've got to have, they're controlling a piece of land and most of it has to be green space. You can actually factor in how much you need to make a successful community. And that's the point of lessons learned, and how much now is the benchmark for providing biodiversity net gain, providing all the leisure and recreation space. And it's being able to command the figures and numbers so you can actually convince that it delivers some of these benefits and it's not just greenwash. But also reassuring the developer that they've got to listen to this. They've got to hear what people want. And so much is based on negative reaction. Oh, they want more green. Well, actual fact, we're offering them so much green. It's a case of them managing it properly.
Do you think a lot of the negative reaction is because most people's experience of new housing development tends to be these estates, which are sort of urban extensions, if you like, where it's just housing and they're car-based and it's cul-de-sacs, and they're not actually creating any new amenities. If anything, they're actually being a drain on the existing town services. So what I think the projects we're working on have in common, I mentioned Harrington in Oxfordshire before, but also Sibson in Huntingdonshire, is that they are new settlements in greenfield, currently greenfield land. But that takes a kind of bold, ambitious approach, doesn't it? But what happens is you're creating a place where everything can be self-contained and on your doorstep. So that has a lot of arguments for sustainability.
And that is absolutely the key point, which is that in past time, offering housing development has often been seen as an estate with no facilities. All of the settlements that I've worked on and continue to work through, such as Harrington and Sibson, provide the necessary social infrastructure and transport infrastructure. And so the key to that is when it's delivered, it's at the early stage, and you're not overstressing local town and village facilities. And you made a point which is actually part of this discussion about the factual point is over 4,000 is the size of a secondary school, which tends to create a large community. 4,000 homes is not always the right size. I mean, it's then looking at what else is in the area if you wanted to do a village of 1,000 to 2,000 homes, but still providing sufficient facility. And this is where the point that we emphasize all the time is that containment of trips and travel is part and parcel of what we do with a new settlement, because the biggest concern most people have when addressing an issue of a new settlement is the impact on the local transport infrastructure. Now, if the new settlement provides primary schools, local shop, sports facilities within walkable distances from the homes, then there's an encouragement to people to use the facilities that are provided in their new village or new town, and that cuts down the need to travel to far distances, which actually is called containment of travel. And this is incredibly important, and it's again proven to work on previous examples that you can reduce the trips significantly that people need to make. And then post-pandemic, working from home, which if supported properly with business hubs in the local village or town, enables people to cut down commute trips. It doesn't mean that they totally eliminate having jobs in other towns, but the number of days that they travel is reduced, the facility to work from home or have meetings in the local environment. And anecdotally, I doubt if the facts are going to come out for a few years. People really like it and want to stay in an environment which is a great environment to live in and enjoy and work in. And so this move, which is happening right in front of us, is really reinforcing all these things that have been said and have a sort of base of information which help to justify, in a sense, the creating of a new town rather than adding endlessly onto an existing town.
We're talking here about building new towns, which is about new build. But how are we sort of minimising the carbon impact of these places? And also, it's important to say why we're doing that, isn't it? Because there is a housing crisis. We need to be building 200,000 homes a year just to house the people that need a roof over their heads. They're either in temporary or unsuitable accommodation or on council waiting lists. So, you know, if we are having to build new in order to meet this housing crisis, how are you making sure that we're minimising the carbon footprint?
I mean, I think whatever the number, people will debate forever and policies will try and shift it one way or the other. It's necessary to demonstrate that good places can be created which are carbon neutral, zero carbon and low emission. And the new settlement is an ideal place to demonstrate that because with modern methods of building construction, factory and other type of prefabrication and the use of low impact carbon materials, means that these settlements potentially reduce the embodied carbon in the construction. Not only that, each of the schemes I've worked on has looked at a different way of reducing carbon in energy consumption. The first one, it seems crazy now that we were thinking about it, was using locally grown coppicing for biomass, which was effectively scuppered when the house builder said we will have to sell the houses with gas cooking. So forget it, we won't be able to put in 2 pipes. The second one, we used a combined heat source for electric and hot water, which meant an extra layer of infrastructure pipework to heat each home from hot water generated from a central plant, which has proved effective, but it's still a bracket higher in cost than standard housing. And unless, of course, you have a sort of new thermal countries which have hot water springs, it's really easy because you're not using fossil fuel, you've got it embedded in the construction. The current move is towards now the more efficient use of solar panels. And again, a new development can be planned around using solar panels more easily than retrofit.
Either in the buildings or in a separate, in a sort of solar farm? Or...
We have to do everything. I mean, I think it's necessary to, I mean, if I would be putting wind turbines as well, but that's not popular with the local planet. But anything that provides a renewable energy source, whether it be a field of panels or on individual houses, it's possible to do that isn't possible with a retrofit. So I think you have to look at the weight of balance between all these factors and achieve. I mean, again, I wouldn't be doing this if there wasn't any chance of aiming towards low carbon and low carbon emissions.
And does the same go for building less roads as well? Because I suppose if we're designing places where it's all about walking and cycling, then arguably you don't need, and also having these hubs where big articulated lorries and deliveries can break down into smaller deliveries to go into the town. All of that, I would assume, can reduce the amount of grey infrastructure.
Yeah, the concept of mobility hubs and active travel is now prevalent in all master plans, demonstrating that we will be able to reduce road infrastructure costs via reducing the amount of roads needed, because as you scale down to smaller vehicles, electric bikes, electric forms of small-scale travel, you can then utilize footpaths and pavements more readily, shared surface, for example, than having large roads associated with then additional large cycleways. It's a complicated equation because there's still efficiencies in having large delivery vehicles, efficiencies in having
collecting rubbish
collection. But you can see yourself, everyone can see how the retail logistics has adapted to working in cities and providing small-scale delivery in residential areas using electric vehicles. So, that's driven by corporate and profit motive, is that if you can get your product to a customer, they'll keep clicking and using it. So there are ways to make this work. It just needs to be transformed into the other utility providers and the service providers. And it's ironic when you look at some of the old size dustbin vehicles. They were the size of a small family saloon car back in the 50s. And obviously you need more of them. They're more labor intensive than a huge single truck. But it's never say never. It's possible.
And do you think people are starting to get used to and embrace things like car sharing and
absolutely. I mean, I think one point I want to make is that the pleasure in designing new settlements, there's a lot of aspects where you have to take a deep breath and everyone's going to tell you there's a better way of doing it. But one of the pleasures is the gradual introduction of people surrounding this theme and topic who want to contribute. And so car sharing is something I think a lot more people want to contribute to than are able to. So can we quickly provide more opportunities for them? Mm. And it's this business of aligning good things with what people could do, which I think developers can take on board, because it's an easy win if you can get someone to create a car club, because then people will be satisfied that they can leave their car at home. In the same way, I think use of public space is really crucial. But I think one of the problems that developers have got is that they're really frightened of overpromising. And the management of car clubs, the management of open space, and the management of travel, it is generally onerous. And I think there's a big part to be played if you structure these new settlements right, where you start to create a community trust, where the management is taken on by people who really want it to work once they've occupied or thought about moving in. And these community trusts exist. Letchworth Garden City was one of the first to create them. All developers know it's the right answer to create a settlement which is handed over to management. And community trusts can build on the voluntary sector, which is vitally important, because, to make management of open space, you need people wanting to keep it good, wanting to look after it, and taking time to help to clear drains. And one of the things I think is fantastic is Extinction Rebellion have now joined forces with the London Marathon to not block these type of big social events, because they're good for people. The London Marathon is a commercial event, but it's fundamentally about people being active, keeping healthy, getting out into the countryside or running in streets and urban streets. And the fact that one of the big sort of campaign groups is going to support that is exactly what New Settlement, that's the direction New Settlement should go, where they're saying, okay, we don't want to necessarily damage the environment, but if everybody had a stake in keeping it a good environment, because the parameters set are high quality and good for the environment, then you will get, no one is paid to run the marathon. They're all volunteers. And having a voluntary sector which wants to actually do something for the environment is the great force which will make it change.
Which is how it was always done traditionally anyway, I suppose.
Yeah, I think the thing is what we're waiting for as a tip. Somehow we're waiting for a catastrophe to happen for the voluntary sector to say, forget it, come on guys, we're going to sort this out. And so I've always promoted, separately to my work, issues such as food growing. And you'll know about my work on creating sustainable food growing in communities. And I also actively volunteer as a sports coach and manage a local cricket club. And so some of the things you've talked about, Max, in Park Power, about how the green spaces are so important to Londoners and other the countryside, they very heavily depend on people volunteering to get involved, because that for whatever reason the municipal authorities can do the best they can. You can create parks trusts, but you need hundreds of people to see the value
as a community.
As a community, take part in these things. And I think it was a year ago I was asked to talk about food growing in new settlements, and I was asked a question. I made the point that in England we live off one, we're sort of lastminute.com in terms of food supply, and nobody knows where their punnet of raspberries has come from and why they've got it in November and things like that. And so I was explaining how this all has worked and how we're not properly able to resource food from our own table, from our own environment onto the table. And I sort of said there is a doomsday scenario where food will rapidly run out, and everyone was saying, oh, how quickly will that happen? And I said, well, at the worst case, within a week. And then 6 months later, shelves were empty.
Yeah.
And that is because it actually happened, because we don't source our food from our local area. We don't know what it could be growing, and so people just stop growing.
Remind me, Gary, I think you worked out how much space is needed for one person to be self-sufficient in growing.
Yeah,
how much was that?
Well, it's my calculation is based on the calorific intake needed for an average person, and that is transferred into how much food source you can grow from a piece of land on one crop a year, and it's 1 square metre per day per person, which means that typically you need a minimum of 300 to 400 square metres to grow your own sufficient food, vegetables. And then if you want some additional protein, it's bigger than that. But which is actually quite onerous, because no one has a garden 365 square metres large. But
if you did and you were vegan, then you wouldn't need to...
If you had a garden that's 365, you wouldn't need to shop again. You'd have to be a good grower, because, you don't... But then obviously you can use additional means to grow 2 crops a year.
Yeah.
They create an energy need, but if you have solar panels, you can use, what they call it, multi-story and hydroponics. But the important point about creating this understanding of what one person needs per day is to make it possible to extrapolate in your head. Well, I've got a garden, it's 50 square meters. It's probably worth growing something in it. Or if I combine forces with some other people, we can do this and do that and share. And the idea, I think, which is my point about voluntary community collaboration, is that food growing is the key glue which links us together. It's how you create a family environment, how you socialize. This is part and parcel of living. And if we were able to make it part and parcel of the environment we live in by at least growing some food, then it demonstrates the strength of a community. And when some bigger problem arises, the people have already started talking to each other about the fundamental social interaction. And so food is a key. And if you do various things such as creating a food hub where you can interchange with other communities, it was a very interesting possibility.
Just to round off, it would be good to know from you what's next for you and for Place 54, and what are you excited about or worried about?
I very much want to act as a agent to help to develop small and younger practices, which is why I joined the collective. So I collaborate with Edge Urban Design, Hannah Smart's very good friend, and Sarah Murray, and all their colleagues. And if I could just provide a little bit of experience, a little bit of knowledge to help small, younger companies, I mean, probably bigger than companies now than mine, but actually startups, to actually promote these ideas. That's really how I see myself progressing over the next few years. I think the important thing is to engage with people, because the key message for the environmental disciplines is don't keep secrets for commercial gain. Spread the word. If you think something's good and it's working, tell everybody about it, because that is what we need to do. If everybody tried to compete to save the planet,
we're not going to
forget it.
So that's our second podcast, and already I think you can see the incredible variety and richness of these conversations. We've gone from communications and the power of storytelling to master planning and the power of co-design and community engagement. I'm really looking forward to the next one, so stay tuned.